Good evening, everyone. Dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen from social media, Facebook Live and YouTube Live. This is Rudra Narayan Das, Executive Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development. Welcomes you all to this global digital platform of intellectual gathering of World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021, organized by Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha, in association with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. The broader theme of this conference is ethnological context, disciplinary practices of social science, and policy frames. On behalf of CARD, I extend my profound gratitude to Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, Professor Sarath Kumar Palita, Acting Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and Professor Dr. Sanjay Kumar Naik, respected Vice Chancellor of Odisha. I would like to thank our conveners, Professor Dr. Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist and philanthropist, Mr. Charudat Panigrahi. Friends, in this evening, we have with us an eminent personality of India, Padma Shri, Professor Santha Sinha ji. Now, I would like to request Dr. Neena Das to go for an introductory remark and guest introduction. Over to you, Dr. Neena Das.
Thank you, sir. Honorable dignitaries present here, and esteemed professors, and esteemed our most weighted resource person, Professor Santha Sinha Madam. I would like to introduce all of you to our chief guest, chief speaker today. Friends, in this evening, we have with us Professor Santha Sinha Madam. Santha Sinha Madam, born in January 7th, 1950, is an Indian anti-child labor activist. She is the founder of Mamidipuri Venkataya Rangaya Foundation, popularly known as MB Foundation, which is named in memory of her grandfather, Mamidipuri Venkataya Rangaya, and is a professor in the Department of Political Science in Hyderabad Central University. She headed the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights for 2 consecutive terms, 3 years each. The National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, NCPCR, was set up in March 2007 under the Commission for Protection of Child Rights Act 2005, an act of Parliament. Sinha Madam was its first chairperson. She was awarded the civilian honor of Padma Shri by the Government of India in 1998. In today's webinar, Santha Sinha Madam will deliver her talk on child rights and activism in social science research. Now, without taking much time, I'd like to invite Santha Sinha Madam to initiate her talk. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Now, Rudra sir, it's over to you.
Thank you. Ma'am, please start.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this very generous introduction, and also for inviting me to speak to you on a topic that is quite very close to me. And it's not often that we have universities asking for lectures on children and their rights. Usually, I mean, so far we have seen many marginalized sections of the radar of university research, like the Dalit, Adivasi, women, but children have not captured the imagination of social scientists and research among social scientists. So I am indeed very, very happy that you asked me to talk to you about children and their rights and the possibilities of social science research on the matter. What I thought I would do to you is to give you a larger framework on the debates on children's rights. So I will divide it into 5 topics. The first thing is I would like to talk to you about what is a child right. I know all of us know we have all had childhood. We have all gone through the phase. There is no way in which we couldn't have been sitting in this meeting if we weren't children once. So, but what are child rights? What is the link between child poverty and child protection? What is the link between child poverty and justice? Then, how important is the notion of child participation? And from there, I'll just lay forward to you some research topics that could be taken up by social scientists for doing PhDs or MPhils or even a book on children and their rights. Now, first of all, let me begin with what is children's rights. I think it's important to have a definition. I mean, are children's rights different from other rights? Or are we talking about all of it in the same manner? At one level, I must say that uh, uh, children rights are not any different from any other right. I mean, all human rights are the same. You can't make out a difference between one human right and the other. Let me tell you what I mean by a right. Right now, first of all, a right is an entitlement that has to be protected by the state, in a sense that you cannot talk about rights without talking about the state and without talking about a state obligation to protect the right. So that is the first aspect of a right. The second aspect of the right is that it has to be enjoyed equally by all. If it is not enjoyed equally, then it cannot be a right. The principle of equality is integral to the issue of a right. Now, what does it mean when we talk about children? What do you mean by principle of equality? It means that all children have an equal right to a good quality education. So we've already laid the foundation for a discussion, for a social science research on this. Are children enjoying equal right to education? If they're not, can we call it a right? So the principle of equality is so important to the definition of a right. Now, we all know that a right also means social justice, especially in a context like India, where there is a tremendous inequalities and tremendous discrimination in terms of caste, in terms of disabilities, in terms of poverty, in terms of gender, you know, uh, and a huge historical handicap. We know that many of them would not be able to access their rights unless they're given certain special provisions. These provisions in India were called the reservation policy, but it could also be other policies of affirmative action. So, the policies of affirmative action, the policies of reservation are those that in fact endows them with social justice just so that they are able to access rights with equality. So, in this sense, I have so far told you that a right is a state obligation. A right has to be enjoyed equally by all. That if it has to be enjoyed equally by all, some will have to be given preferences over the others just so that they enjoy it equally by all. And that preferences is through policies of affirmative action. As far as children are concerned, affirmative action could be in terms of, say, scholarships, or it could be in terms of, say, noon meal programs. It could be in terms of free textbooks, free books, free education. Unless this is granted as an aspect of social justice, they cannot access the other equal rights, and we cannot just call it a right. So this is how I would like to start by saying that a right, a definition of children's rights should also encompass all these aspects. While saying this, there's another aspect of children's rights I would like to talk to you about, which is very important. I think is who are these children? It is now universally accepted that all children in the 0 to 18 years age group are children. regardless of their gender, regardless of their sexuality. If a child, a person is between 0 to 18 years, it is that is a child. So all persons in the 0 to 18 years constitute children, and their rights are to be protected. In India, there are about 421 million such children. 42% of India's population is children. It's a very, very large number. In that, there can be kind of, especially if you're in the activist field, or even the field of specialization, academic research, there is always a debate on which child is important. Are rights of children 0 to 6 years important? Are rights of children 6 to 14 years important? Are rights of children from 14 to 18 years important? So there is this discussion of what age group should take a priority over the other. Now, as far as rights are concerned, all age groups are equally important. If there is a denial of right of one age group, it will impinge upon the right of the other age group. Say, for example, if a child who is 6 to 14 does not have the right to education, then she will not be able to enjoy equal opportunity after she is 14, and will not be able to play the role of an equal citizen. Or say, for example, if a girl is married by the time she's 15, then she will sort of face a lot of difficulties in terms of violence over her bodily integrity. You know about the physical violence, the sexual abuse, the mental violence a young girl goes if she is married so early. And that can tell on the life of the child who's born to her. So a 15-year-old girl's loss of rights can reflect on a baby that is born to her who will be malnourished, who will be small, and who will not have all the capabilities to grow up as a healthy child. So, in a way, one would say that all age groups are equally important. One cannot say that let's focus first on little children first and then do 14 to 18. We will have to take care of all age groups of children. So that is one part of the debate. The other debate that usually happens is, are all rights equally important? This has happened more often in especially again, as I told you, in the activist field. Some would argue that look, right to life is more important than right to education. If you're not living, then where is the point in talking about education? So maybe you should focus more on health and nutrition and not on education. There would be somebody who would say that look, if you are not educated enough, you will not have the capacity to take care of your health and nutrition. So that is more important. So again, the debate is that there cannot be conflicting rights. There has to be complementarity in rights. So all rights are equally important and they complement each other. And you cannot really sort of say that one right takes precedence over the other. When I'm saying this, there could be a situation now, say during the pandemic. Now, during the pandemic, schools were closed. Children could not get to school, and the vulnerability sort of compounded manifold. They had hunger. They have their parents had loss of livelihood. Many of them were turned into child labor, and then would it then be say arguing that look, children education is more important, so let schools reopen? You know, how, so what do you do when there are these are extraordinary situations? So what side do you take? And I think here one will have to go into the concept of, which I will do later, the best interest of children. It's not that they're conflicting rights. It is that under certain contingencies, one will have to take a stand of precedence of some rights over the other rights, but only for the contingency and not for always. So in that sense, all rights are equal, all age groups are equal, and there is no way in which one age group is better than the other or one right is better than the other. There are other aspects of rights which I would like to talk to you about. We can deal with it. I'm sure there will be some space for questions. that when rights are not given, there are any number of researches that talk about that, look, the rights are not being, a child is not able to go to school, or a child is forced to work because a child is poor. That because of poverty, the child is not able to go to school. That is one particular argument that is given. I think as researchers, we will have to try and find out if that argument is in fact valid. Or there is another argument that talks about, it happens in most of the policy documents that you see, that India is a large country, it has a large population. How can it provide for everything for all children, 420 million children? It's not possible. So let us do it in compartments. Like let us first do right to education up to 14 years, 6 to 14. Then, if it is possible, let us do right to education for 0 to 6, or for 14 to 18 years. Or it can also be that we have such a large population, and that where is the way in which we can provide for food for all. So let's provide food for only some part of the population, and that it is impractical. Let's be practical. Let's say that children who are working in hazardous industry, we will ban, because that is harmful to the child. Other children can work. Children who are working for their families before and after school hours, that can be condoned. Because let's be practical. Parents depend on their income. They will have to work. So let them go to school and work. And then they come up with catchy phrases like, let them earn and learn. Now, all these arguments go against, as I said, a principle of equality. These arguments do not happen when you're talking about planning for well-to-do children. Why is it that the population argument doesn't come? Why is it the practicality argument doesn't come? Why is it the poverty argument doesn't come? I mean, why? So I think these are some of the contentious issues that one will have to discuss, and I will take it up later on. So, but today I thought, although I would say that all rights are equally important, the rights of rich and poor children are equally important, all have to be protected, I will focus mostly on children who are marginalized, and about the link between child poverty and child protection. One of the important rights that the UN Convention on Rights of Children had talked about is right to protection. It says that every child who is vulnerable has a right to be protected by state and state action. So, uh, 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 when a child is forced into child labor, when a child is forced into child marriage, when a child is forced into commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking, hunger and malnutrition, poor physical and mental health, displacement, homelessness, when a child is caught in situation of civil unrest and armed conflict, when children are children of migrant labor, both rural and urban poor, all of them need protection. They have a right to protection. Unless they are protected, they will not be able to enjoy other rights. So, therefore, the child protection is discussed in the context of child poverty, and says that unless you prevent children from falling into these kinds of uh, areas, you will not, these kinds of situations, you cannot actually uh, uh, protect children and enable them to enjoy all their rights. Now, so child protection is actually prevention of or responding to specific instances of abuse, exploitation, violence, and neglect of children. And this protection has been enabled in India through the Juvenile Justice Act. And that unless there is child protection, they will not have access to other rights, such as right to survival, development, growth, and participation. So this, I think, is very, very important, that the children of the poor are more often than not subject to all kinds of violence and abuse, and they need to be protected. Now, who does this protection? This right to protection has to be given by whom? Again, the right to protection, any right, as I told you, has to be a right which has to be protected by the state and state alone. The role of you and me, the role of civil society, is in bringing pressure on the state to see that children are protected. And to bring pressure on the state, then you will have to, first of all, be shocked and outraged that children are being denied and deprived of their rights. And unless there is a moral shock and outrage, actions will not emerge out of it. So I think it is so important that we will have to talk about what this right to protection is about in relation to poverty. Here, I would like to say that most often poverty is seen as income poverty, as poverty, and but we know when we look at the Human Development Index reports, when we study Amartya Sen, when we study many of the scholars, they have enhanced or expanded the definition, which says as a poverty would also include lack of health, lack of education, lack of dignity, lack of capabilities that enable you to function as a full-grown citizen. So one cannot talk about poverty only in terms of income. So when you talk about child poverty also includes not having all these entitlements, which and there is a link between child poverty and child well-being. All these are important for a child to be living with dignity. So let us not fall into a trap of looking at child poverty only in terms of income, but in terms of all the services that are necessary for a child to enjoy her life to the fullest. And here we must talk about also another aspect of poverty, which I think is so very important. It's as good for adults, but for children because they are far more sensitive, I think, and they're not yet used to kind of mental pressures. Especially, you find that the experience of poor children, if you go into that, the humiliation caused by poverty is widespread. And it's a common experience of all poor children. And it's not rare. I'm sure you know, if you are a Dalit child, if you're from Adivasi community, if you are poor, if you're not wearing the same kind of clothes as others are wearing, or say, in fact, if you are in a public garden, there are some places where a poor child would himself or herself go and not go. These are not, somebody does not say you cannot come here, but there are social margins where the child is brought up to be told that you cannot come in here. Say, for example, the insult and humiliation is so much that they know that they cannot get into a movie theater, they know they cannot get into a mall, they know they cannot get into elite places. In fact, the gated communities have decided that the children don't exist and they're totally invisible for them. So, in a sense, what does it tell to the child when you're actually like this? And here, I think it is the humiliation that they face. It is an insult they face because they are poor. And this kind of a disrespect in public and private places, is quite cruel. And we don't seem to be sensitive to the fact that it is a cruel reality. The access they can have for hospitals, or how they're treated in a police station, or how they're treated on social welfare hostels, the kind of food they get. It's particularly cruel fact that children in poverty sometimes feel responsible for their situation, and they also blame themselves. This humiliation that is connected to child poverty is unjust, totally unjust, and we have to criticize uh, poverty because it is unjust, because it is unfair. And sometimes, what happens, this has happened most often in the NGO circle a long time back when I was more active, that there is kind of a glorification of street children, an admiration about their resilience, about how innovative they are, how they are able to survive against odds, and how great they enjoy freedom, and there's a lot of admiration about their coping mechanisms. And sometimes they say that these children actually are so strong that they do not experience the emotion of being humiliated, stigmatized, So then is it okay? If the child does not feel humiliated, if the child does not feel insulted, if the child feels strong and feels that he can take on the whole world, but the child is poor, then is it just? I think here we are not looking at subjective issues. We are not looking at this, we are not concerned with the state of mind. We are talking about the objective reality. Is it fair for a child to be on the streets? It's not necessary that the child thinks he's free. Is it fair for the child to be having such loss of freedom? So, in a way, the injustice of poverty has to be determined not by a subjective feeling, but an objective reality. It has to, it's not based on the experience. Because as I told you, the NGOs would say, why must they go back to school and live a regimented life? They're happy on the streets. But we know that they're happy on the streets till they're 16 or 17. The minute they become adults, nobody is going to sort of admire them for their freedom and autonomy. And in any case, they have not developed any capability or to function as a citizen, to grab opportunities that market could provide, to grab state entitlements. They would not only become unseen, untouchable, but these are the street children who would be, I think, expelled from the society as uh, unseeables. They don't exist. So, in that sense, I would say that child poverty is unjust. So, I'm trying to tell you how unjust child poverty is, that it causes humiliation. It's unjust even if it doesn't cost humiliation. It is unjust because it does not provide equal opportunities. And what children are, uh, what is necessary is that they have to be in an environment which is full of love, where they have sufficient opportunities to develop positive relations towards themselves and to others. So, especially because childhood is a very sensitive phase, it's only just that children have a right to be protected. And this injustice is systemic injustice. It is the social, economic, and political structures that make children what they are, and that those structures, those processes have to be changed. What I'm trying to tell you is usually when one talks about children and protecting their rights, they're talked about in a very welfarist framework. But even seeing that children get their rights and are protected is a contentious issue. It's a political issue. And it has to be resolved through policies, through politics, through societal outrage, through community action. And it is not easy. I'm saying this again because you see that there are these slogans that come across about girl children, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. Just by saying Beti Bachao and Beti Padhao, education is not going to happen. Every girl's right to education is a process of resolving conflicts. It's a process of resolving conflicts in the family. Who is to cook? Is it the boy or the girl? Who is to clean? Who is to sweep the floor? Who is to eat first and who is not to eat first? Who can go to the market? Who cannot go to the market? Who can travel in the night? Who cannot travel in the night? Then where are the schools? What kind of schools for girls? Are there toilets? So you keep going, and about child marriage, what kind of protection there is, about violence, what kind of protection there is, sexual abuse, what kind of protection there is. See, these are very deeply, as I told you, contentious issues. It happens only with processes of creating a larger environment that will resolve these contentious issues. It cannot be done only through posters, through some campaigns, and through some inaugural functions of lighting a lamp, but it has to go through the lives of every girl and resolve the conflict for her and kind of create an atmosphere for gender equality and patriarchy. I have not seen at any occasion in the government's program, in a state program, or even in a program of enlightened citizens where they question patriarchy, where they question gender discrimination when they're talking about girls. So in a way, when we're talking about child poverty, when you're talking about justice, we're talking about contentious issues, issues of conflict that have to be resolved, issues of giving justice to children. And so one will have to be kind of sensitive and sympathetic to children, and also realize that these children are poor not because they chose to be born where they are. It's an accident. If you have seen the letter that Rohit Vemula had written, that it's an accident of history that he was born where he was born. He didn't choose to be born in a poor family, in a Dalit family. So children have no choice in the matter. So they have, if they have to alleviate their poverty, the injustice on their own, it's almost next to impossible. And they will have to sort of depend upon the state. And it is only the state that can provide justice to them. I suppose so far it is clear what is child rights, what is child protection, what is the link between child protection and poverty, and what is the link between child poverty and justice. Now, I will go into the next part of it, which is very, very interesting and very important. That is about child participation. In fact, this is what is happening in many, many places, that we have many NGOs, and also, even the UN Convention of Child Rights, talking about child participation, that you have to listen to children, you have to listen to their voices. I think this is a fair enough demand, and listen to the choices that they want to make. Here there are one or two dilemmas. I'm not giving solutions to it, but I might just tell you what this listening is about children. One thing in my experience I found was it gives a lot of energy when you listen to children. Children's voices tell you the truth about themselves and their lives. It tells you about what their aspirations are. It tells you about what their struggles are. It tells you about injustice that they are facing. I do not know how many of you have looked at child participation, and when they talk, it does give a first-hand, experience of the pain, the insult, the humiliation, and somewhere charges you to wanting to do something to change this reality for children. So to that extent, I think listening to children's voices uh, are so important, that gives you energy to wanting to change. And those voices will have to be heard at every level, from the level of the family to the Gram Panchayat, to the district, to the state, to the national level. It is so important that there are spaces created for children to speak, to listen to their voices. This is one thing. The other thing that's so important, to prepare them to exercise agency. In fact, when a child says, I don't like the violence in my house, so I run away from the house to become a street child. Now, that is a very historic step. On the other hand, there is another child who doesn't like to be a child laborer and says that, look, I'm going to stop being a child laborer. I'll go to school. Are they both equally important steps in terms of agency? Both are part of child participation. In one case, the child is participating and taking a decision to become a street child. In another case, the child is participating and taking a decision to go to school. Are they equal? I will leave it to you. But I can only say that when you're exercising agency, you exercise agency to change the power structure, not to maintain status quo. So a child who runs away to become a street child should be enabled to go to school to be part of the change and transformation to become a different person rather than to become even more vulnerable and marginalized. So, in that sense, just because a child takes a decision, that does not automatically mean that the child is exercising agency. You exercise agency to transform the reality for you in a positive manner and in changing the power structure and the dynamics around you. If you're not able to do that, and if you join greater vulnerability, I doubt if that is agency at all. And I think this is something that people, when they talk, must understand. I have some interesting stories about girls exercising agency because we have seen boys exercise, girls also exercise agency against child marriage. And since I have worked with children, I've seen that their forms of protest are amazing. I found that if a girl does not want to get married in a very non-violent fashion, she decides not to talk. Monuvrat for 3 days, for 4 days in a week, she decides she won't talk to anyone. Other form of protest is she will not sweep, she will not comb her hair. You know, that multiple forms of protest the girls have sometimes amazes me that she becomes such a big nuisance that sometimes the parents will have to just give in to the fact that yes, she has to go to college, she has to go to school, and we can't get her married. This is just to tell you that their children have their own ingenious ways of exercising agency. And if they did not do so, no change could happen. I always say that even a young child, say a child labor becoming a student going to school, could not have happened if that child did not take the decision to walk out of his past. If he did not take the decision to say that, no, no, I'm not going to be working anymore. Look, other children in the village are all going to school. I don't care what, but I'm going to be bold, I'm going to be courageous, I'm going to school. So, the issue of agency and participation is a serious issue that needs to be discussed. But there is in this, are children equal to adults? Is that question. Even adults exercise agency, even children exercise agency. But when we're talking about children exercising agency, I think there is a responsibility of the adult to protect children. That's they're still children till they're 18. It is one thing is we will have to take care of children because they are today. And we also have to take care of children because they are in the process of becoming. So they are the beings who have to be taken care of, and their dignity has to be taken care of. But they're also becoming into citizens, into people with a lot of voice. So there is a phrase that comes in the UNCRC that the best interest of the child has to be protected. Yes, but then children have evolving capacities, and it is the responsibility of the adult to invest in children's evolving capacities just so that they grow into responsible adults and also to seize opportunities that are available to them. I thought these concepts are important. I'll just go into the I'm just giving you the debates that there are on child participation, children's agency, best interest of children, and evolving capacities. I'll just go into the last part of it and then perhaps leave it and give you some topics for research, and then we will leave it for some question answers. Now, I mean, these are general statements. They not be relevant only to the child, but then it's so important to make these statements. Now, one thing is that when children are enjoying their rights, you know, it, it is transformatory. The impact of children enjoying their rights can disturb existing power structures, economic structures, political structures, social structures. This is one topic for your research if you want to. So you would think that a simple act of a child going to school is a protection of children's rights. But here I'm making a statement, it's much more than that. It has a greater impact. And I'll just give you some examples of why I think it is much more than that, for you to explore other possibilities. One thing that it did when we saw that, it's say some 1200 villages, every child is going to school in the work that I did. The families which were very poor, you know, their quality of life became better. So you might wonder how. You might think that children are working because they are poor, they were earning their income, but now the children have gone to school, so the families must have become poor. We found out in a study that we made on whether the families became very poor. We found out that in fact the quality of life in families improved vastly when children were no more available in the labor market. Many girls were sent for cottonseed cross pollination. Uh, Boys were bonded laborers, cattle herd, shepherds. Now they're all in school. Women's wages went up 5 times. When girls were working only for 9 rupees a day, this was some 3 decades ago, and when they went to school, women bargained because there's a scarcity of labor, and women would get a wage of 70 rupees a day. So what they brought to the family was a lot more cash than what happened when girls were actually working. Or say, for example, the boys. This is very interesting. They were all bonded laborers, and they would get as an annual contract 5 pots of dhanya, grains. That was when they were no more there. The farmers had to employ adult men, and men wouldn't work for 5 pots of grain. They came up with an annual contract of 70,000 rupees, 80,000 rupees, and on top of it, hours of work. For 8 hours only we will work. And they also talked about leave. And all this happened without them even organizing into a trade union. It was then we felt that because children were working, families were poor. Child labor caused poverty. When children were not working and when they started going to school, in fact, it increased the quality of life, not just for the family. We found that the farmers also said, now we can't spend so much on labor. We have to do something. So, slowly technology took over. Tractors started to come because they couldn't afford so much of labor. I can give you an example of biscuit factories that we were working with. Children were removed from packing of biscuits. They were doing one by one packing of biscuits, and in fact, those children hated chocolate and vanilla flavor. By the end of the day, they were horribly, nauseous at smelling chocolate all the time and vanilla flavor all the time. That's aside. So when children were removed from work, we found that the employers just replaced children with packing machines. So somewhere we found that children not only depressed wages and child labor not only depressed wages, and that removing child labor in fact improved quality of life for the poor. Child labor also brought low level of technology, most unproductive. And in fact, by getting them off, they unleashed productive forces, which absorbed very different kind of a labor force. So in a way, we found a link between child labor, productivity, quality of life, very fascinating. We also found that the schools were very different. Earlier, uh, uh, there would be hardly any students in schools and there would be hardly teachers teaching or working. But when there was such a demand for schools, And older children started going to school. Schools were not prepared for them. Of course, we had to talk to a lot of teachers. We did bridge courses and all that. But the quality of schools improved when community starts demanding for education. Then the schools became better. In an area where we were working, there were only 90 government school teachers. We found within 3 years, there were 300 government school teachers, regular teachers who were appointed. So then Gram Panchayats become active in protecting children's rights. So in a way, we found that the impact of a child going to school is good for the child, but it has a transformatory role in changing the social, economic, political structures around that, especially if it is happening in a scale. And I think this is what social scientists will have to look at. Like if in a society every child is fully nourished, there is no malnourishment, then what does it do to the rights of the woman? Because unless a woman gets her right, her leisure time to breastfeed the child will not get fully nourished. If she needs a leisure time, then there has to be a gender division of labor, a disturbance in the gender division of labor. So we can go on, and how it changes the gender division of labor between the man and the woman, and how it enables, say, perhaps we found in our own area, the Anganwadi centers became more active because women had to work in any case. And we found that early childcare centers were so much linked to women's right to work. They were good for children, children's rights, children's nutrition. So, I'm just trying to tell you how children's rights can change so much that there is greater claim of children in the resources. So in a way, there's a contestation for resources. There's a contestation for investments in education, in early childcare, in removing hunger, in removing nutrition, in removing child marriage. And all this requires institutions, that requires structures, that requires processes, that requires employment. So when you're doing something like this, how does it transform? So when you're removing the last layer of oppression, it is transformatory. Let me give you the example of India's freedom movement. After independence, you've removed a layer of oppression. The British went away. Independent India unleashed new productive forces. The kind of poverty that there was at the time of independence, I'm afraid, does not exist now. I'm not saying there is no poverty, but what I'm saying is removal of a layer of oppression always unleashes productive forces, new cultures, new dreams, new aspirations, new beginnings, new imaginations. And I think it is so important to research on all this. And in fact, when you do children, it is actually a process of deepening of democracy. So I end it here, but I was just thinking the kind of studies that I have done, I'll just make a list of it, I'll just read them out and then leave the rest for question answers. Is that okay? Yeah. One is the thing that we had worked on, research is about whether poverty is the cause of child labor. And we did on child marriage, gender equality, gender inequality, and critique of the law on child marriage. On on gender inequality, on Dalit and Adivasi, and this discrimination in schools towards them. That is one thing. Then also on disability and the condition of children and their rights in areas of civil unrest. That was another area where we could work and we could do some writings about. And I suppose when one will do research, one will want to understand laws and policies, the flaws in laws and policies, and how anti-children most laws and policies are actually. One could also look at the debates that has happened in the assembly, whether children were discussed at all, how often they were discussed, why were they discussed, and whether there can be a comparison between the assembly discussions between, say, 3 states, and whether that has related to the kind of entitlements children are enjoying in sense whether there's a link between the political voice and giving services to children. You know, there are many laws, there are many policies, and what is actually happening, what are the assumptions. I'm not going into laws and policies because each law would require 1 hour of discussion. I can do 1 hour on protection of children against sexual offences, or on Right to Education Act, or on Child Labor Abolition Act, or on Juvenile Justice Act, or on child marriage. You know, these are specific topics which needs serious study and understanding, and which needs also comparison between one state and the other in the country, and also comparison between what is happening in India and South Africa, what is happening between India and other developed countries, what is happening between India on education and say South Korea. In fact, India was doing better than South Korea at the time of independence. Why is it that South Korea moved so much ahead? And why is it India did not move ahead at all on children and their education? A lot of these can be made as research studies. But thank you very much for your patience, for listening to me, and for giving me this opportunity. Uh, I, I will now hand over to the organizers.
Thank you so much, madam, for and joining all the way from Hyderabad. It's really a thought-provoking session. I'd like to
Your
invite
voice
Dr.
is
Nupur
breaking.
Patnaik
I'm
for...
sorry.
Yes, madam?
Your voice is breaking.
Okay, okay, madam. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Nupur Patnaik for go quick comment, please.
Yeah, a very good evening to Santha, Sinha ma'am. Ma'am, it's a great pleasure to have you over here. It's a great honor for all of us. Ma'am, the way you have highlighted us about child rights and activism in social science research, though there are very few literature over here, very few discussion on academics about child research, child development topics. I think ma'am, it's really very enlightening to listen to you. And I think the whole audience would agree with that. The Facebook, the Twitter, everywhere, wherever they are listening live to this thing. Ma'am, you said about child protection, child rights, and a very important topic, that is child agency and participation. And that's what many people don't know about that what is an agency. We always discuss about in gender usually agency, but child agency and participation is a really very innovative discussion, ma'am. And how children also need exercising their agency, and this is the responsibility of the adults to protect the children. So ma'am, thank you so much for this innovative discussion. The research that you have done, it's really enlightening for all of us, that you highlighted to us about the child rights, child voices, and what are the different policies and programs that are necessary for checking these kind of child-based gender inequality, or child who are belonging to the marginalized communities, specifically when we talk about the tribal children or other children. So thank you so much, ma'am. I think it is a very, very thought-provoking and inspiring discussion. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Dr. B.C. Das for go any suggestions and comments. Then we'll move for the another session that is called question and answer.
Thank you, madam. I am Dr. B.C. Das from Ravenshaw University, Odisha. Really, your talk is an eye-opener for the activists like us who are researching on child labor and related issues. Child rights are in questions nowadays. When we talk of a score of problems connecting to child rights, beggary, malnutrition, mortality, education, their health, and starvation, forced labor, and so on. So many issues are being heightened to these child rights. This has been a very detrimental issue in our society, and it has also created a dreadful challenge to the government policies and schemes. So, how can we get rid of this kind of social phenomenon? So, this is a humble submission for your reflection, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Vichidas. I would start initiating the question, madam. How would you relate this activism and academia in terms of social science research? I know you more than the last 2 decades, and I gone through every your research, every aspect of your works, and in terms of academia and activism, I gone through your NGO, what actual work for many child rights and child activism so far is gone. I would urge you to elaborate more. How difficult to be a activism first, and then how could you relate this activism world into academic world? How both the world simultaneously bring together in a single platform and do collaborative work? Thank you, madam.
Let me first of all tell you that I have not dichotomized academic work with the work in the field. They are complementary, and in fact, if one worked in the field, that is to uh, enlighten me and also to learn from what is actually happening, perhaps to make my classroom lectures far more informed. Uh, uh, and to also understand important texts in political science with the kind of knowledge one has about issues on the ground. So, in a way, for me, the touch with the field complemented my academic work. At the same time, what one was learning through books and through whatever one has gained in academics enabled me conceptualize what was happening in the field. So in a way, I don't see a dichotomy between the two, but a complementarity between the two. That is one thing. Secondly, I think I was not an activist. I mean, I would not like to fall into that because activist. I, I would like to say that I would not like to be stereotyped as either an academic or an activist. I would like to be thinking about, I do not know how one can define oneself, but certainly not in terms of these categories. So I hope this answers the question of how one has accommodated the two. I think they're two both complementary. I mean, you can't be working in the field without informed decisions and without even conceptualizing what is happening on the ground. Like I told you, we had to conceptualize about whether poverty causes child labor or not. Then what causes child labor? Why does it happen? Then we have to look at the issue of social norms. Then look at what people have written, like say, for example, Myron Weiner on state and child rights. We have to look at the literature on the issue. So, in fact, right now, when I'm talking to you about justice and child poverty, I'm actually using a lot of it. In fact, everything of it, from a scholar who I'm not able to recall his name, but in a wonderful book, a small book on how to understand child poverty and child justice. In fact, sometimes I feel I've plagiarized from the book entirely. So, one will have to read books. One will have to read books when you're actually doing your work on the field. You have to be responsible when you're actually learning from the ground. And uh, so, yeah, this is how it is.
Thank you so much, madam. Now, my second question is that, madam, when people are doing research in terms of Indian academia, was perhaps concerned so many social norms and concern and always overlook the social also. in terms of social science research, people are doing work without visiting fields, right, madam? And then they have prepared reports, they have prepared their PhD thesis without actual no determination works for social science. If you suddenly believe in the work of Habermas, he said the content and community. We have to locate and highlight the community's concern first, then we'll go for research. Because our research did not highlight anything per se in terms of these social binaries. What is your answer, madam?
Let me tell you that I wouldn't be so harsh on social science research that they are not doing anything. So some brilliant books have come about, so I would not go by what you say. But I'd like to give a perspective. I think research has become a very important site for contestation of resources and also contestation of power. And it is so important that you do social science research with truth and honesty, just to be on the side of the poor and to see that they gain from evidence-based research that we make. So we must know why we are doing the research. Of course, it is for our degrees of MPhil or PhD, but at the same time, I think research is a kind of a tool, is an instrument of change and an instrument of standing by the poor for their rights, for their entitlements, and for their share in the economy and in the polity, for deepening of democracy. So there is nothing, we have to actually think that we are doing research for a political purpose. Although there are, of course, ways in doing it in terms of a research with substantiation, with evidence, with correct compilation of data. At the same time, it has to be for the sake of deepening of democracy and for inclusiveness. I think it's so important. Then you feel very charged. Then you feel that, look, I am doing this for this purpose, and let me sort of make my arguments tight, because it is in this way I can enable the poor asserting their rights.
Thank you so much, madam. That's you are one of the truly inspiration and role for many of us as a truly social science contributor and researcher as well. I would like to Professor Shubhamdas to go for the question answer session if anyone anything to ask, madam.
Thank you, Dr.
I would like to request Shravan Kumar from Sambalpur University to have a quick reflection. Shravan Kumar Bag, are you there? Shravan Kumar Bag, are you there? I would like to request.
Hello.
Shravan. Okay.
Yeah. Good evening to one and all. And at the outset, let me to thank the organizer and Professor Das also for organizing this deliberation. In fact, I'm so happy because almost after 2 years, somehow virtually I've been connected to Santha Sinha ma'am, and I mean there were several platforms when I was directly listening to ma'am, and it was not possible in the last 2 years because I have left the development sector. But anyway, I'm so pleased, and also it is good to listen to ma'am on this such an auspicious day, because as rightly ma'am has said that rather than being activist, she is a very true champion for this cause of child rights and children. So it is really enchanting, ma'am. Now my question would be, ma'am, as we all know that in the last pandemic, we all have seen that there has been a lot of discussion and debates uh, whereby the digital divide has created a lot of gaps, and somehow the children's right has been once again questioned, because there was a time when we all were discussing on access issue, and after a lot of fight, in fact you were there who became the champion of right to education act, we started talking about equity and quality. But man, as we all see that in this last 2 years, that same issue of access has once again, popped up, and again we are in a vulnerable position. So do you think, ma'am, that it is right time to see the prospect, the ambit of child rights once again, and the issues of rights for children from a larger perspective? The one. And the second one, ma'am, would, as we all know that the in between the new education policy has also come up, which has started taking ground. So how do you think, ma'am, this right to education provisions can be clubbed with the larger frame of NEP, as we are also approaching to a new curriculum? Ma'am, if you could throw some idea on that, it would be really,
I
beneficial.
think you have raised very important issues, and it's almost uh, uh, it exposes both the issues, exposes the intention of the government, intention of the market, and what they actually want for children and their rights. And it's very clear that the issue of online classes and education only deepen divisions. Said that it, in fact, was a way of excluding large sections of children. And I'm glad that it was critiqued by everyone. Many educationists. I have not seen anybody come in support of the online education. While in the beginning it was being practiced, the debate, as far as the debate is concerned, it is closed, saying that online education is simply no, it is a digital divide and that cannot be uh, done. But then it continues for the rich children. In fact, as you know, online education cannot be substitute for a school, either for the rich or for the poor. And online education is not education. To call it education itself is an oxymoron. Education is much more than learning to read and write and rote learning and answering questions. It is supposed to, if you go through the theories of education, you know that education is for making a total personality, for being aware, for being informed, of equality, of justice, of being democratic. There's so many debates that are around education. Online education has trivialized all those debates. And I think as people who are involved in education have highlighted these issues, and one will have to contest the issue of online education and bury it once and for all. NEP, I would think, has been, it has some good points because it talked about all children from 0 to 18. Uh, but at the same time, one is very unhappy with it because it has not made any mention of children's right to education. In fact, you had mentioned it. The Right to Education Act was not even it except in one or two places there was no mention of it. The policy should have been a policy on how to make right to education possible rather than ignore that there is a fundamental right to education. I think it is flawed. I mean, I can give a separate lecture on a new education policy. There are some good aspects here and there, but the totality of the framework is not about inclusiveness. It's not about democratizing schools. It is not about public schools and government, but in a way, it has obliquely supported private schools and private colleges. I think the basic framework has not been to contest inequality in education. There are, of course, certain good points, but then if those good points are not in the framework of equality and justice, I think equality and justice will go to the background, and those points would be uh, highlighted to the peril of the poor.
Now I'd like to ask Neha to go for any question, please. Neha Sharma. Yes, please, Neha Sharma.
Madam, namaskar. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes, ma'am, I have a two question.
Yeah.
The first is the how we define the children means I'm not very happy about this age group, and then there are 14, 15, 16 age group, and dropout rate are more after that in the schools, in the education sector. The children who are work in the informal sectors are also 14 plus, the majority of the 14 plus, but we don't include them just because of the age number. Because so far mental ability is concerned, physical, mental, do we consider them as adult or grown up, not as a children? The second question is, ma'am, about the new education system which is rapidly going through the privatization. Most of the, even I belong to a very small village where we have studied in government schools. Now though privatization is happening, people are preferring to give admission to their student, though can um, just economically very sound, they are taking their student to the private school. In future, I'm looking at this education system where there will be a binary, there will be a two category. One is for the government school is specifically for these children, and the quality of education is going to be very low. So these two queries I have.
Yeah. Yeah, regarding the second, I agree with you entirely that there is a gradual abandonment of government schools, investments in public schools, and uh, one will. It's a cause for concern, and it's a cause for the texture of democracy in India. I'm looking at the larger framework. If you're not going to serve education for all children equally, then it is going to be a disaster for India's democracy. And when I say democracy, democracy means inclusiveness. Democracy means welfare for all. You can't have democracy with only some benefiting and some losing. So I think there has to be serious thinking about the nature of education. I would say there is a crisis in education. Here, I would like to come back to the new education policy that you're talking. The new education policy talked about learning crisis, but I think the crisis is not in learning. When you say it is a learning crisis, then the responsibility is on the children, that the children have to learn, but I think the crisis is in education system, because when you say learning crisis, you're blaming the teacher and you're blaming the child. And you're not looking at the larger systemic issues that uh, has brought about this kind of crisis in schools. And there has to be a total overhaul of the education system, which has to start from not such a centralized system that we have, but a decentralized framework and a rethinking on education. Nobody is doing that at the moment. It's a very sad scenario that we are in today about education. I'm sorry, I have no answers to your questions, but I can only say that there is a huge education crisis, and COVID has made it even worse. It has reversed even the small gains that we have made in education, and it seems that it will take a huge effort to bring it back to some kind of sanity. We are in a terrible education uh, emergency situation, and the thing about people opting for private schools, let me tell you again, due to COVID, many of the poor are opting out of private schools. They're not able to afford it. And there's a huge confusion because they're not getting back to the government schools. They can't go to the private schools. And there's such a difficult situation. They're not able to even take the decision on which way to go. So there is a confusion. And I think COVID really brings to us the malaise of education system that has happened over years.
Yes, ma'am. And I have just one or two questions. How do you address the problems of child rights so far as the problem of malnutrition is concerned? When in 2016, Odisha's Jajpur district made headlines after the death of 22 malnourished tribal children of Juang tribe at Nagada. And another question is, what is your suggestion to curb the increasing number of crime against children, which increased to 4.5% in 2019, if you see as compared to 2018, so far as the NCRB data is concerned? And when if we, even if we have this stringent act like POCSO, so what is your idea to curb such issue?
You see, I mean, I have no quick fix solutions, except that as researchers, I think we have to continuously do the studies and raise these questions in an informed fashion. We have to write articles in newspapers. We have to give questions to our MLAs and to the MPs saying, raise these issues in the parliament. I think as researchers, we have a lot of work to do. We have work to do which is more than what newspaper journalists will do. Right now, the journalists are very active. They are collecting the data, they are collecting the information. But as researchers, we will have to know how to mull the data, how to conceptualize it, how to present it, and make the system answerable. I think we have a huge role to play. I am not talking about what role other sections should play, but here this is a group of academics, of scholars, and we will have to make children's rights the center stage of academic research. Nobody, I began by saying that nobody is doing research on children, serious research on children. Most research is done by newspaper journalists. I'm glad they're doing it, but I think we will have to do much more, and not be just reacting, but making an argument, showing that you have done nothing, telling the state that this is what it is. Like I said, do comparative studies, show where things are working, and say that if it is working there, why is it not working here? There's a lot, I think, academicians, scholars who have to do to ensure that children's rights are protected.
Yes, ma'am. One more question. So, how do you correlate the child right with the decline of sex ratio in India and Odisha in particular, when especially the ratio of child population of Odisha in the age group between 0 to 6 years has come down from 953 during 2001 census to 934 during 2011 census, which is lower than the sex ratio of the total population of the state is concerned?
Absolutely, absolutely. Here again, I would say that it requires a lot more awareness, a lot more pressure on the system to do its work properly. And let me tell you, when we were criticizing Punjab and Haryana, Punjab especially, they have bettered, although on the whole, the sex ratio is less, but the kind of improvement they've made between 2001 census and 2011 census is remarkable, more than what other states have done. So it is possible to correct it, and we have to learn from what they did. The entire civil society took part in changing the sex ratio. The religious groups took part, Red Cross took part, Rotary, Lions Club took part, activist groups took part, Communist Party took part, Congress took part. So, in a way, political parties, all civil society organizations, all of them took part to reverse it. And unless that happens, I'm afraid that what you have described will get, because they're working overtime. The people with those machines, are really working overtime, and we will have to raise our voice loud and clear. This just can't happen.
Thank you, ma'am. Over to Rudra.
May I request Dr. Nina Das to go for a vote of thanks?
Thank you, sir. That's it. Again, dear excellencies and distinguished guests, or senior professors and research scholars particularly, those who are present here. This is Dr. Neena Das, Assistant Professor from Gangadhar University. I would like to, I'm very privileged. It is really a privilege for me to present vote of thanks to our Honorable Chief Guest, Padma Shri Professor Santha Sinha Madam, who gave her vital time from her busy schedule to grace the global conference. It is an honor for us. We hear from you, Madam. On behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development Odisha, I express my deep sense of gratitude to you, Madam, that you shared your experiences with us. Your experiences have inspired us. Words are not enough to express your valuable presence here, ma'am. The quality, as you have said, the quality and life of people have improved when children are in school. When they are unavailable in the market as bonded laborers, the contracts of adults increased. And because children are working as laborers, it caused poverty. Various new things we learn today. Removing child labor also increases technology, productivity, quality of life, which is really very fascinating. And it has a transformative role to change the social, political, and economic system in the country. You have honored this global conference with your inspirational experiences and your research work, particularly on poverty, gender inequality, disability, and what are the comparative studies between different countries, disability, flaws in laws and policies. And as you have said that these academic and child right activities are complementary to each other, it is really encouraging for all of us, particularly for the young researchers who are present here. So the research is an instrument of change, tool for poor, an instrument for deepening the democracy and for establishing an inclusive society. I'm really grateful to you, ma'am, that we hear from you, we learn from you, and we'll march forward to do research in this area. And particularly children will be the center of academic research from tomorrow.
Thank you.
In 4 universities, in IIM Sambalpur, in Central University Koraput, Gangadhar University, and in Ravenshaw University. And last not the least, I extend vote of thanks to our director, sir, Vikram Kesari Jaina, sir, for taking so much pain for organizing this global event. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. And again, Rudra Narayan Das, sir, our executive director, CARD, Nupur ma'am, Neha Sharma ma'am, Dr. V.C. Das, sir, and the whole team for coordination. And on behalf of CARD, I extend my profound gratitude to Professor Mahadev Deswal, Director IIM Sambalpur, Professor S.K. Palita, active Vice Chancellor of Central University of Koraput, Professor Sanjay Kumar Naik, sir, Vice Chancellor Ravenshaw University, the convener of the program, great historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, sir, and also Mr. Charudatta Panigrahi ji, the eminent activist, writer, and philanthropist. Least not but the least, last not but the least, the research scholars, the participants, professors, and eminent guests who are present here and who have participated in this conference. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Bye. So I'm leaving now. Bye.